Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Alone podcast. Today is another exciting episode. We have our guest Larry Roberts with us. Larry is an Alone veteran of two different seasons, season 2 and season 5. On Vancouver Island for season 2, Larry went 64 days, and then in Mongolia for season 5, he went 41 days. So obviously, Larry has a lot of experience and has learned a lot about himself and a lot about life. And Larry, I'm very excited to have you on the show today. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and chat for a little while.
You bet, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I guess my first question for you, I started off with an easy question for Justin. So my first question for you, just to get things started on a light note, is: Are there any mice alive within about a mile of your house? Have you gotten them all taken care of?
No, I live in the country and I have about 46 acres where I live. I live in central Minnesota, which is about an hour north of Minneapolis. But anyway, I live out in the country and there are cycles with the mice. It's starting to get fall in my area. It's still really nice out. Well, it's fall in everybody's area, but it's still really nice in my area. But once it starts to get cold, the mice really try to find ways into a warmer environment. So once fall hits, then I'm going to have to be on my game and start setting stuff up. But yeah, believe me, I am very aware of how many mice are within, like you said, about a square mile radius.
Yeah, we so I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, so we're starting to cool down quite a bit as well. And we were asleep the other night, or trying to sleep the other night, and we heard a little mouse scurrying through the ceiling, and I think we've gotten two in the house so far. So tis the season, right?
Tis the season, and there's always at least two, but usually more.
Yeah, that's what we're afraid of. So, well, so you said you're from Minnesota. Is that where you're from, or is that just where you landed? Can you kind of go
No,
in far back here?
yeah, that's just where I landed. I was born in Oregon, raised mostly on the West Coast, Oregon, California, Arizona. I lived for a summer in Salt Lake City. Um, so I've been all over the West Coast. And then I met my wife in Phoenix in high school. I went to four different high schools in three different states. I think I was in Oregon my freshman year, Idaho for sophomore, and then Arizona for both junior and senior years, but different cities. But anyway, I met my wife about halfway through my senior year at Camelback High School in Phoenix, and we ran away together and went to California. She had already joined the Navy. She was in the delayed entry program. So she went off to boot camp, and she's from Minnesota. And anyway, after years of being together, starting to raise our kids and stuff, uh, she had a chance to move back to Minnesota. We were in California, Northern and Southern California. And towards the end, we were in Southern California in Oceanside, which is about an hour north of San Diego. And I did not enjoy California. It just was not a fit for me, the particular area I was in. There's certainly beautiful parts of California, but the southern part where I was at, I just did not enjoy the weather. A lot of people like sunny and 70 all the time, but I like changes. But anyway, she had a chance to move back to Minnesota, which is where she is from. And once the kids started getting into kindergarten and stuff, we both made the decision that it'd probably be best. And that's, I followed current events pretty closely. And the stuff in Afghanistan was going on. So we kind of made the decision that it would be best for our family if she got out of the military. And we liked it here. We stayed in a suburb of Minneapolis until I started my apprenticeship for an electrician, and well, all the way through my apprenticeship as an electrician. But then once I became a journeyman electrician, then we decided to move out, and actually that had been a dream of ours always since we met when we were 17, and always to have a hobby farm was always our dream. So we looked for approximately a year before we found the place that we're at. And we've lived here for about 20 years. And we had a hobby farm for, well, until the kids grew up, until about uh, 10 years ago, or not even, no, not 10 years, maybe 5 years ago, we kind of stopped hobby farming. But then during the hobby farming years, we never had to buy meat from the grocery store ever. We raised everything here. But I got to rambling. What was your
No,
original question?
that's perfect. You just kind of took 1 through 5 off the list. Um, so Minnesota's where you're at. It sounds like you've been all over at least the western United States. I have to ask. I spent some time in Arizona, so you were in Phoenix, and where else in Arizona did you live?
Mesa.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I lived further south. I was in Tucson and south from there. So it's a beautiful state, but it's very hot. And if you like change, you don't get a whole awful lot of that.
Yeah, but I did enjoy Arizona for me personally better than I liked um, Arizona. Uh, I liked Arizona better than I liked California. And actually, um, the experiences I had, so I was really young. So it also depended on the people that were there. And I remember I had moved from Oregon, which was I love Oregon. It's a beautiful, beautiful state, but in small towns, and it's small towns everywhere, but it was, we were kind of nomads. My parents, I was never stationary, so I never really had roots. So kids kind of look at you funny. Oregon was okay. Idaho was not very good at all. And then I moved to Arizona. And I remember the very first thing I drove up, my parents took me to the school, and that was the very first time I'd ever seen a carrot top haircut. But anyway, I mean, it was a bigger school, and the kids were really nice and really um, just not so clicky as some of the small towns and some of the other places I had gone. And Mesa was good, Phoenix was good, and but it's hot. But then also uh, one of the few courses that I kind of think was really cool that they made us take in Arizona was, and before you could graduate, was an Arizona history class, and that was normally a freshman class, but I had it when I was a junior. And actually, Arizona has a lot of different bioregions that are very interesting. I mean, you can go clear to Flagstaff, or it's still a dry piney forest, but still you can have a coniferous forest up there, or you can go to, the very southern part, where it's just absolute desert. And then there's different desert parts where, as you get closer to Mexico and stuff, it's not just all sand. There's a lot of environment there. And with I mean, if you go in the right time of year, all those cactuses and stuff are blooming. And I don't know, I really like Arizona. It is hotter than hell, but I'll give you that. But it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, that's one of those secrets of Arizona is really what that place looks like during the monsoon, and it's an incredibly
Well,
beautiful state. If you're listening, don't go there. I don't want to anger my Arizona friends by getting them too crowded. But no, it's a fantastic place, and definitely has a place in my heart for sure. You mentioned your parents are kind of nomads. Was that due to career, or what can I ask? What took all the moves and the bouncing around?
my dad was a felon and was not a very he wasn't able to hold a job for very long, so we moved to a lot of different places. My dad actually, when I was a kid, used to gamble in Las Vegas for a living. Before they started installing security cameras and stuff, he used to mark cards, and he would gamble to make a living. And then as the cameras started getting installed, he had to find a different way of making a living. And being a felon, it was hard for him to find a job. So after the money dried up in Vegas, we had to move around to different places,
Just chasing work.
chasing work and doing whatever he did. My I haven't talked to my dad for quite some time, so my early childhood wasn't the greatest.
As if I can ask you a question on that, as a child, did you understand or know what was happening, or were you kind of oblivious to the
No,
situation?
they told me everything. That was part of the problem. I didn't need to know all that. I didn't need to know what he was doing.
Huh. Well, that I mean that sounds like Sounds like there's a book or a whole conversation in there somewhere. But we'll leave that one alone unless you've got anything else you want to share.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So you mentioned as well you were a hobby farmer for a while, and it's something that you and your wife wanted to do. It sounds like from the beginning, and then you just kind of closed that shop down. What were you guys focusing on in your farming efforts, and what led you to stop?
We were mainly focusing on raising animals because, um, and not birthing animals on the farm. Once you start birthing animals, it starts getting quite complicated. But I mean, you could buy a young calf steer, raise it for, a year or so, and it's going to provide a lot of meat for you. And it's a lot cheaper than buying it in the store, and you know what's in it. There's no hormone, or well, unless you put your hormones in it, but we never did anything like that. But anyway, I mean, it was just a peaceful kind of, hobby farming experience thing that we had always wanted to enjoy. And our particular area is not good for gardening. In Oregon, we had a huge garden, and so I know how to garden quite well. But this particular area is part of the St. Croix Valley, so there's rocks, and it's just brutal. But we can raise animals quite well. And then I wanted to have activities for my kids, of course, and they were very into sports. But then also, so I have a son and a daughter. My son was more into sports. My daughter was into sports a little bit, but then also they both did 4-H, and they showed pigs and they showed chickens at 4-H and stuff like that. And it was just a good way of showing them where the meat is from. And we would take them to the cities and stuff like that when they're with their sporting events or whatever. My daughter's gone to the state fair with her dog, and my son went to the state fair with an electrical project that he did. So we experienced some of that, but it's just good to expose them to the country life and things like that, and just have real good food. And so that was our reasoning a little bit with that. And then, it's just enjoyable. But then as I got older, the kids started growing up and started leaving the house, and they're not so interested in doing chores anymore. I'm talking after they graduated high school. My daughter went to college, my son went off to the Air Force. So that left my farm hands left,
Yeah.
to make a long story short. So that's why we kind of gave it up. We still do a little bit of gardening. We have dogs and stuff like that. But then we kind of changed our goals in life too. Now that the kids are gone, we do a lot more traveling, and it's a lot harder to have animals when you travel. It's not fair to everybody that you have to ask to take care of them, because there's a lot of work involved.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned it was part of it was having that connection for your kids, and I think that is so important in a time when you can go to the store or you can go to wherever and get whatever you want, and you don't realize what it is or where it came from. I had the opportunity to shoot a deer a few years ago, for example, and my daughter was, I think, 3 at the time. The oldest was 3 when that happened, and so she came out into the garage and got to watch me processing this deer and break it down into food. And she, for the longest time, and still to this day, loves to ask what she's eating and learn about where it came from, just because she had that one moment of seeing a full animal get broken down, and then that night be eating some of it for dinner. And even at the age of 3 and now 6, it seems like it still had an impact on her.
Absolutely. My daughter had a little bit of an epiphany type moment when she was off to college. So my daughter went to college for animal sciences, and she had wanted to manage like a farm of some sort. That's not what she does now. She changed kind of what's going on. But anyway, I, I think she was like in her second year, and she called me, and kind of out of the blue or whatever. And she started telling me about this class that she was in and a video that she had to watch. And it was about processing farm animals. And my daughter has helped me, just like you said, gut deer, skin deer, processed deer. She's helped me, fish. She's done all sorts of stuff. We went for my 50th birthday. We went pheasant hunting, and she can shoot a gun just fine, anything. But she watched that video and she called me. She's like, Dad, I've never been nauseous ever when anybody's ever processed an animal. And I had to walk out of that video. And she said, Dad, they don't treat those animals like you do. They're not, respectful, but then also just, take the time. And then also at, these big farms, they don't necessarily ethically dispatch the animal, if that makes sense. And a lot of people who give hunting a bad rap had no idea how their animals are treated. That hamburger that you're buying in the store, that animal has lived in a cage, whether it's a cow or a chicken or whatever. It's lived in a cage its whole life. It's never, it's just bad. So anyway, that was kind of just like you're saying about how your daughter's always remembered that deer processing her whole life. My daughter remembers the fact of the same thing, just years of going out, respecting the animal and processing the animal and knowing where it comes from and knowing where your food comes from and stuff like that, and treating it with respect as opposed to just, buying it in the grocery store.
Yeah, and even when it comes to beef, for example, this is kind of a funny path to be going down, but we've have the opportunity every year to get a little bit of meat from one or two different ranches where we know the rancher and spend time on their land and everything. And even though the work isn't mine and I'm not the one getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning and staying out till 8 or 9 at night, and I'm not calving and I'm not going and rounding up on the range. It's still just different when the person who does that, and there's a face and an understanding of what they go through to provide that for us. And I think it's unfortunate that it's so easy for us to lose sight of everything that goes into our lives. It makes it just a little bit too comfortable.
For sure. And I think it's when you get your meat from a local farmer, just like you said, you're not the one actually raising that, but he did it, and that those animals, you know, have a good life for,
Yep.
you know what I mean?
No, and it's that's important to me, at least. It sounds like it's important to
Right,
you.
right.
So I guess I'll ask you this: have you been cured of the farming bug, or is that going to come back maybe someday, or is travel just too comfortable?
Um, we have kind of bounced around a little bit of the ideas of having just something easy. Pigs are easy, chickens are easy. There's a few things that are easy, but the travel bug is still pretty prevalent. So I mean, it may be in the future, but for right now, I don't see it. We're I mean, I'm getting a little bit older now. I'm getting tired. I've worked really hard in my life, and I enjoy my downtime.
For sure. Well, you mentioned travel, and that's something I wanted to talk about. It seems like you and your family are gone quite a bit, going all over the place. What about travel is it that you enjoy, and where do you guys like to go?
I like to travel because I like to just plain old see new places, and then also experience different cultures. So overseas travel for me is, it's a pain getting there and everything, but um, I mean, just to see other cultures and to just broaden your horizons and just to meet new people outside of your comfort zone is really exciting to me. I have older friends who kind of brag about the fact that they've never left the county or a couple of counties over whatever. We live pretty close to Canada. They've never been to Canada. I don't know. For me, and I'll have to credit my wife for this, because when I was younger, I was really not interested in overseas travel. I was like, we live in the United States. I've barely seen it. I've seen a lot of the West, but I mean, I've never been to the Grand Canyon, even though I lived in Arizona. Um, so I wanted to see a lot of the United States. But my wife has always been absolutely fascinated with England. And we had an opportunity when we were quite young with our young kids to travel to England for quite a while, actually, England and Scotland for at least about 3 weeks. And that really opened my eyes to overseas travel, the the amount of history and the time that, the history that is overseas is just amazing. And I also love to travel the United States. I recently had a trip, I think it was just last week or maybe a week and a half ago, where we have some very dear friends who live in Virginia. And um, we're driving through, and they're driving, and we're riding in the car, and I'm just looking at the street signs for, or not street signs, but highway signs or whatever for like Yorktown and Richmond and things like that. I'm like, wow, I didn't really, I mean, obviously I've heard of Richmond, and I just didn't put two and two together that all of a sudden I'm right there, and that just we saw a replica of the, I believe it's the Santa Maria, which I believe was the name of the ship that Christopher Columbus came over on. We took a tour of that, and just the craftsmanship of the ship. I mean, you're not going to see a craftsmanship of a ship in Minnesota. Maybe if you go to the Great Lakes or something like that. But I mean, just being able to experience all that stuff is really appealing to us. We definitely love the country, and we definitely love the outdoors, but you can also enjoy the cities, but then also the different bioregions of different areas. I don't know, it's just everything. I just love it. Just getting out and finding new areas. It's like when I was a kid, we would go for drives, whatever, in Oregon or wherever. And I even remember as a kid, we'd pass a dirt road, and I'd be like, man, I wonder what's down that dirt road. I'm just always wondering what's down that road or what's down that road. And my wife is the same way.
Yeah, it's that's kind of an illness. I at least I look at it as an illness, right? And I'm sure
Well,
my wife
it's
does
not a
as
bad
well.
illness, but yeah.
We'll be out doing something, and whether it's driving through the mountains or whatever, or even on a hike, and there's always something amazing around that next corner. There's always something, you know, untouched down that road, or something that you just have to go check out.
I think that makes you a better person. I think it makes you a more well-rounded person, and it makes you more tolerable of others. Because if you just stick in your own little circle, then you're going to be a certain way. But if you travel and meet other people, it broadens your horizons and enhances your understanding of other viewpoints, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so important, right? I think we not to get too political or anything, but at least in today's day, it's so easy to be in your own echo chamber, right? To hear your own thoughts and to hear your own beliefs, and even if you're not going to change or not looking to change, it is so important to just listen to other people and recognize that we're all made of the same fiber.
Right.
It's a
And
it's a very powerful
and
thing.
we're all made of the same fiber, and yet there are other cultural differences that make certain priorities more in the forefront than others. I mean, it doesn't have to get political. It can be just the way you live. Like a lot of the Europeans, they don't have huge grocery stores. I mean, in the big cities, they do have some stores and stuff like that, decent sized ones, but they are more organic. They usually shop, at least, if not once a day, every couple of days, and bring home fresh vegetables and fresh stuff. I'll never forget when I tapped from Vancouver Island, being in Canada there, the amount of fantastic produce that we were able to get, even on Vancouver Island, like vine ripened avocados. And I mean, we can get avocados here. I have to go to a Walmart. It's 10 miles away or whatever, unless I want to travel 30, 40 miles, then I can go to probably an organic store, but even, which would be quite expensive. But it just seemed like their produce was better than ours, even just in Canada. And Vancouver Island isn't that easy of a place to get to, just, it's just different.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never would have expected that, actually. If you were to tell me that Vancouver Island was where you got some of your freshest food. I would have been surprised by that. So it is interesting to understand the differences of different cultures, and I've got friends from Europe, and they've since gone back, and their biggest problem was the lack of sense of community. Right? We lived in a condominium development, and there was, I don't know, 150 probably condos in the development. And we were talking one night, and their biggest challenge was is they have all these people living around them, but they never get to see or talk to them. Where back home, every night the shops and everything would shut down at a certain time, all the stores would close, and everybody would just congregate in the streets and in the square, and with their neighbors in their neighborhood, and have a real strong sense of community, at the expense of business, if you will. And
Right.
it got to the point where they just couldn't do it anymore, and they had to get back to that feeling of belonging and that feeling of community.
For sure.
So we'll switch gears here a little bit and get into a little bit, I guess, of Alone. One of the things you and I talked about is that you're one of the, I don't want to say one of the few, but definitely not one of the majority, when it came to Alone, of being more of a traditional person, right? That had a 9 to 5, or I think in your case it's more of a like four to whenever the work's done. But a job and a family and children. You've got your property there. So what was that like? Not really for you, but for your family, to have you gone for a total of over 100 days, but over a month, and in one case over 2 months. What was that experience like for them?
Yeah, it was pretty tough for my wife. Yeah, actually in Vancouver Island, I was probably gone for closer to 3 months because you have the orientation beforehand and then the exit afterwards, which orientation in season two wasn't super long. It was only maybe a week, but then they kept me for about a week afterwards, and I lasted 64 days. So that's 2 months right there. So it's got to be at least 2.5 months. And Mongolia, they kept us there. So we went a bit earlier. We had more of a 2 week at least orientation. And then I had at least 8 to 10 days after I tapped out. And that was 40 some odd days. So that was about a month and a half. So it was quite difficult for my wife. I actually have a YouTube channel, just really tiny YouTube channel. But anyway, I did an interview with my wife from folks' questions and stuff. But we had no contact. She was living, the kids were gone. My daughter was in college, and my son was back home, I think, from the Air Force, if I remember correctly, for Vancouver Island. But I mean, she had basically what they told her is no news is good news. So your husband isn't hurt, he isn't whatever unless we contact you. But I was in a kind of a bad place mentally when I left for Vancouver Island. My job was very stressful, and I really had kind of lost. So my kids had left. I was empty nester, and I'd kind of lost my sight or my purpose in life. And Alone for me was going to be a chance to uh, just maybe reflect on life, whatever. I didn't, whatever, and also provide better for my family. But like I said, I was in a dark place, and my wife still gives me crap about this, but I hugged her when I was leaving, and I said, this is goodbye. I don't know if I'm coming back. And it sounds kind of dramatic, but that's the place I was at. And I only had season one to go off of. And they kind of made it sound like, the Bears were pretty bad and, whatever. And I just was not going to take any gruff from a bear. And I figured I'd probably get eaten by a bear or starve to death. And then it turns out there were no bears on my site, and I didn't, my guts, I wasn't quite mentally as strong as I thought I was. I wasn't able to completely starve to death. But, telling my wife goodbye, um, she brings it up. Yeah, she doesn't bring it up quite as much as she used to, but she's like, "You son of a gun, you." You were anyway. So it was tough on. It was really tough. And
I
then when I
Go
go ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was say I can only imagine, and with a departure like that, I'm surprised that you had the opportunity to go for season five.
Well, I I made it up to her by taking her on a Viking river cruise, and I don't know if you are familiar with a Viking river cruise, but they're pretty extravagant, and she sort of forgave me for that. And of course, when I say I take her, it's both of our money, so it's not like I took her. It was she's like, you need, not really you need to, but could you please do this for me? And I'm like, heck yeah, I can, let's go be pampered and stuff. And but then yeah, when I was able, so I was still in a bad place after season two because I came in second and I was really hard on myself. Um, Now I realize that I did a pretty good job and I did okay and stuff. But at the time, I was quite hard on myself that I didn't win. And um, so it was still, and then plus, when you're, well, this is just me, this is just my opinion, but when you're out there for that long alone and starving, it changes your psyche. It changes you mentally and it changes you physically. And it took me a while to come back to society and to come back to this life, which I have, which is really good with my wife and my kids. But after I tapped in Vancouver Island, I was ready to live under a bridge. I was ready to just disconnect from society. I thought, how can I get out of this job? How can I get out of whatever? And just the society, the demands of society, whatever. Because, and it doesn't really sound rational, probably, to most people who say, well, you have to go to work and you have to make a living, and that's just part of life. But when you have that type of an experience to where you are stripped down to your basic level of, am I going to eat today? Am I going to have shelter today? And that's it. It strips you down a lot. And so it's hard to come back from that. And then in Mongolia, after, so I was really psyched. I thought I could push myself harder all the way up till launch day. And then that morning, um, it was different than Vancouver Island. They launched us one at a time. They didn't have the funds, and plus we were way out in the middle of nowhere. So they only had one helicopter, and so they could only launch us one at a time. And some of the folks I didn't know real well, but some of them I did know, and I knew they had pushed themselves, and I knew they were also dealing with mental trauma from their seasons. And to see them get picked up and launched, and them crying and giving us all hugs. And so then I was last to launch, actually. I believe Sam was second to last, and I was last to launch. And I was just an absolute mess as they were trying to interview me on the helicopter. I was crying. I knew what I was in for. I remembered the pain. I mean, we always keep, or I keep dwelling on the pain, but obviously there was an immense amount of beautiful moments. But the pain, is pretty real. And so I remember just crying like crazy. And as soon as I launched, I mean, I did what I was supposed to do, built a shelter and grabbed all my camera gear and all that stuff. But I knew at that point, there was no way I was going to be able to last as long as I did on Vancouver Island. So I made a pact with myself that I would last at least 30 days because I figure if you can survive for 30 days out in the woods, I mean, I don't care who you are, you're doing pretty good. And so I knew I could last for 30 days. And I figured that if I just kept catching food, then food was my whole big deal. I mean, if I kept catching food, there's no way I was going to tap. But once the cold weather came in and the fish turned off, I just decided that I'd last as long as I could until the food ran out, and then I was going to tap in Mongolia. But my wife, so Mongolia was more of a healing experience for me. I realized that I had done good on Vancouver Island. I realized I didn't need to push myself as hard as I did on Vancouver Island for whatever ego reasons or whatever personal reasons that I, whatever had. And I came back, I think, a better person for my wife. And I think that she realized I had healed in Mongolia. And then since then, I think I've done a lot better. And, but yeah, it was extremely difficult on my wife. And there are very few people probably in this world that would put up as much with as much crap as my wife does. And actually, if you look at some of the folks that have come back from alone, they have ended the relationships. People that have been gone for a while and from various reasons, but some of it has to do with the psyche change that happens when you're out there by yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that about the relationships. When I was trying to learn more about you before we sat down to talk, how Google will kind of suggest a search keywords, right? So you type
For sure.
Larry Roberts alone, and then the next word is divorce, right? And I was like, I don't think that's right, but
Really?
yeah, yeah. So it was one of like the top handful. I'll see if I can get it to pull up again. But it was one of the top handful of suggestions when Larry Roberts alone and then divorce, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
Justin, when I spoke to Justin a week or two ago, not relationally, but for him it was kind of the same thing. When he came back from alone and maybe by extension from other places he'd been in his life, he said to him, he's like the trauma isn't for him. It wasn't these scary or these dangerous or these difficult places. The trauma was coming back, right?
Right.
Is where that struggle was.
Right.
And so that's interesting that that's the same kind of experience for you, and I think that makes sense, but maybe it's unexpected. It's logical, but it's also unexpected.
Yeah, it's uh it's a real deal. For sure.
So were
It's
you were you kind of you mentioned that season five was healing for you, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to ask that question. Was season five, were you healing before season five, or when you were in Mongolia, is that when you started to be able to accept the sacrifice that you put in on Vancouver and those things?
it wasn't until I was in Mongolia. Wasn't until I was in Mongolia and um, talked to some of the other participants, and they shared their stories, and I shared my story. And once I launched, because I was excited, I figured, I realized who I was up against, and I realized that I probably wasn't going to win, but I figured I could do a better showing than even I did the first time I went out. But as soon as I launched, that whole launch day from about midday to when I launched was just this traumatic experience, seeing all my friends going reliving their experiences. And like I said, it's not all bad by any stretch, but you remember those painful things. If you touch a stove when it's super hot, you don't remember every time that it made you a great cheeseburger or steak or whatever. You remember the fact that sucked hot, that hurt, right?
Yeah.
So you have a respect for it. So we had a respect for this particular experience, and we were all some of the folks were, so I'd at least had a few years to kind of process what I had gone through. Some of the folks from season 3 and 4 did not have very long at all, and so their experiences were even more fresh than mine. And so, but anyway, after I launched, like I said, I realized I wasn't going to be able to last as long as I did. And so once I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do probably what I had done before, and that I wasn't going to win, and you have hours and hours to think about things. And so I kind of came to terms that it was okay if I just enjoyed this experience. And that's kind of what I said about the day 30. Look, man, if you last 30 days out in the woods with little to no food, then kudos to you. And that's kind of what I figured to me for myself. And I figured I'd enjoy the experience more, look at the scenery more, and plus Mongolia was a lot more open, kind of a more friendly environment. So I could take walks, um, and I could active fish. It was a river, so I understand rivers more than I do oceans. So, and I mean the scenery was very similar to parts of out west. And I mean, it sounds stupid, but I mean, I would talk to the mountains. It would just, I really enjoyed my experience without pushing myself. I did push myself, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I was hungry. And even one time, I remember it rained. The storms would come up like crazy, crazy fast. But anyway, one time it rained, and I did not want to get wet. I did not bring the proper. I thought it was going to snow, so I didn't really bring proper rain gear. So I stayed inside my shelter for 3 days. 3 days I didn't eat anything. 3 days all I left my shelter for was to go to the bathroom. And I remember laying in bed with the hunger pains and thinking to myself, "You remember this, you goofy sucker. This is painful. You don't want to do this. You want to go back to your family. It's okay. You did this before. Just remember." So for me, I know it sounds weird and sadistic maybe, but pain helps me remember certain things. I mean, you remember things through pain. And even though it wasn't, I mean, I'm not sadomasochist or anything like that, but I forced myself to stay in that shelter. I wasn't going to get wet, and just remember the good things in life, and remember, just, I don't know, it was just a big healing experience. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Is like, this is it's honestly a privilege for you to share this because you know as well as I know, but you being the person sharing it, you know that there's been what, call it 80 contestants, 70 contestants on the show of Alone, and of those, really there's an even smaller number that make it to. I can't judge the difficulty, right? But there's quite a few that are out pretty early. So there's really
Right.
only a handful of people that have been able to successfully put themselves in the same situations and that even understand. And so thank you for trying and attempting to share that because it's, you're right. No one is going to understand that unless you've done it.
Right.
And you mentioned too, and I'm glad that you went here. So you mentioned in season two, you were in a much different spot than you were maybe going into, and especially coming out of season five. And in the notes that I shared with you, I just kind of mentioned it. I don't know if it was the producers and the way that they decided to cut your video or cut your film or what, but season two, there was a lot of struggle and a lot of trial, but season two is the real reason why I was so excited to talk to you. You were one of the first people I wanted to speak to because I think that your experience with the show and the things that we were able to learn about you, but about being a human, is one of the most amazing things ever to come out of Alone. And obviously, for you and others, I'm just referencing towards the end of your stay on Vancouver when you kind of had your breakdown moment, and it seemed like to me at least that from that point you weren't really fighting so much as you were living. Can you talk about that and what that was like and maybe how those moments have continue to shape you today?
Well, I gave up after that point. So I had a really bad day on day 55. I The fish were turning off. I wasn't eating much. Uh, I mean, I was still eating. Thank goodness, there were chanterelle mushrooms everywhere, but I was still eating. But I was crazy hungry. And at day 55, the best way I can describe it is when I was a kid, I had like 104 temperature one time. And I just remember my head, the only way I can describe it is it just goes zoom, zoom, zoom. So there's just this thing going inside my head. It's like a headache, but only it's just this vibration almost that's going through my head. And the surf is pounding like crazy, which normally I enjoy, but I mean, sometimes I just enjoy just silence, right? So it was really, really bad. I was super, super hungry. Uh, my head was going nuts. Every time I tried to sleep, so this had been leading up to this point, but when you're that hungry, you dwell on food. And I was dreaming about food. I would like start to dream about, like when I come home and visiting with my wife, but then immediately it would be, well, what are we going to have for dinner that night? And are we going to go to the grocery store? And blah, 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 blah. And I would wake up about every hour and I was using a sweater, a wool pullover type thing for a pillow. And I would have drool all over my pillow. And this went on like in Vancouver Island, I was sleeping a lot. As soon as it got dark, I'd go to bed and I wouldn't wake up until it was well light. So that was probably at least 14 hours of sleep inside my shelter, or at least staying inside my shelter. And so for like 14 hours, my head was doing that. The surf was pounding. My stomach was hurting, just all this stuff. And I literally, almost like what you see in the movies where, the guy actor slaps the woman when she's freaking out. I slapped myself. And I'm like, dude, I thought I was going insane. I literally thought I didn't fear dying. I feared going insane. So I thought I was going to go insane. And luckily it started to rain, just pitter patter a little bit. And if you've ever spent any time under a tarp during the rain, it makes a certain sound. And for me, that's a very comforting sound. So it comforted me, and I was able to get through the night. And I woke up, got out of bed kind of early, and decided that I would. So I've been one of the items, or you can take 2 items of emergency rations, and I had not eaten any of my emergency rations because it was only season 2, and I was really hard on myself, and I figured that if you eat your emergency rations, it was like cheating. And so, after I'd had that horrible night, I figured I need to eat my emergency rations. And the fish weren't biting. There's so much work involved in an ocean, trying to set trot lines or gill net or whatever. I mean, it was brutal work. And I just kind of gave up. And I'm like, you know what? I'll survive on my emergency rations for as long as I can. And then I'll give up. And I was able to last another, we didn't have that much emergency rations. I mean, like leading up to day 55, when the fish had turned off, after day 55, what I would do is if I caught a fish, I would eat it. And if I didn't catch a fish, then I would take some beef jerky, just barely a handful, just barely enough to put in one palm. And I would put about 1.5 quarts of water, maybe 2 quarts of water, and I would boil that for quite some time. And then I would drink the broth. So I'd had about 1.5 quarts, maybe a quart of jerky broth. And that was my dinner that was the only meal I would eat for that entire day. And then the next day I would fill it back up with water again. And then I would drink the broth and then eat the meat. And then by the 3rd day, I usually had something that I had harvested, whether that be a fish or a mushroom or whatever, because by that time I had to be very careful of how many shellfish I harvested, because I had harvested every single shellfish that was edible off of my little horseshoe cove. So all that was leading. So day 55, I kind of broke and decided to go ahead and eat a little bit more jerky, like actually even not just the broth, but actually eat a tiny little handful of jerky. And I actually started gaining weight off of a tiny handful of jerky a day instead of just eating the broth. And then by day 64 or whatever, I couldn't handle it anymore. I was like, I'm done. I got to eat something. And so, I gave up on, I wasn't going to leave if I still had food. But once I started rationing it and I could see the end in sight, that's when I broke down and started crying like crazy. And it's still very painful to this day.
Thinking about that experience.
Yeah. Thinking about that I had to give up. It's a hopelessness. When you don't have food, it's a hopelessness feeling. It's a hopeless feeling. And there's a lot of people on Facebook and stuff that say, why are you, why are these people not eating the, like they give Dave Nessia crap a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave Nessia is one of the toughest competitors and the nicest guys ever. And they're like, well, he had all that fish and yet he was starving to death. I've talked, so they have us all talk to a psychologist before we go in and after we're done. And this psychologist has worked with other survival type shows. So she knows the psyche of a person who is starving. And if you go back even and look about, the concentration camps or whatever, not to even, equate the
Right.
two,
Yep.
but they always hoarded food and we always hoarded food. In every survival show, if you're really truly surviving, you hoard food because you know what it's like to not be without food, and to just that mental aspect of knowing that you have at least a bite or a morsel of food. We're not, I mean, when you say dinner, when I say dinner, you're talking like a little bit of flavored water, but that's better than not having anything. And that's for your psyche. That's good to know that you have that. And then once I realized I wasn't going to have any backup, the fish weren't biting. I didn't know how to, I tried all different fishing techniques, but if the fish aren't biting, they're not biting. And yeah, once that, I killed all the mice on my place. That was Vancouver Island was the Mongolia. I still had mice, that I could have probably trapped, but Vancouver Island, I harvested everything around my area, everything. And that's a hopeless, hopeless feeling.
Well, as you're talking, even it's terrifying to me to think of gaining weight on jerky broth and a handful of jerky every other day. That's kind of that's a terrifying thought, right? To think that your body
Hard
is,
to, it's hard
yeah,
to explain to
yeah.
people
No,
don't.
it's
Yeah.
that's a terrifying thought, and it's, I guess, with this, how has your perspective on I don't know how to maybe word this correctly, but how is your perspective on the survival world and all of that? How has that changed based on what you know now?
Well, I'm afraid I don't personally in my mind, I'm afraid I've gotten a little arrogant, I guess. But I don't never, share that or post about it or anything like that. But you can definitely weed out, and this is just social media, but also, well, not just social media, because I've attended and taught at several schools, and I teach my own classes sometimes. But the folks who say they know what they're doing, as opposed to what I've actually done and the folks on the show have actually done, you know, there's a little bit of a difference. But then also what it's done for me is it's giving me absolute confidence in my abilities. Not to say that I'm like some sort of expert or that I know all this stuff or anything like that, but the knowledge base that I have, and anybody who knows or starts to study about wilderness or anything, basically, if you're kind of enlightened, you realize that what you know is just a fraction of what's out there. So I know that I only know just a fraction of what out there, but what's out there. But that fraction I know is valuable and it's valid. So that has given me an incredible amount of confidence to be able to take my family or whatever into the outdoors, but then also just in life in general, because I, I'm pretty I'm pretty intense for the most part, and I get pretty stressed out with work and stuff like that. But this latest job that I'm on is a very stressful job. It's very complicated, but I can kind of see myself not getting as stressed as I used to, because especially now it kind of helps that I'm a little bit older, a little bit more financially secure, but just in general life skills, I know what I've survived, and I know what I can do. And if the world goes to crap, or, whatever happens, whatever your mind wants to sit and envision, I know that I think I'll do okay. It gives you, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it gives you a confidence that very few people, they may have it, but they don't really, really have it, deep down. I mean, a lot of people are skilled in the outdoors survival community and stuff like that, but have you really, really tested it like the folks on Alone have done? And I kind of equate it to, I've said this 100 times about my kids doing sports and practices and stuff. It'd be like if you played a sport, but you only practiced. You only practiced with your teammates. You only practiced with a small group of people. And then we're thrown into, so there's those people, but then there's a few of us that got to practice, and then we're thrown immediately into like the Super Bowl. You got to prove and figure, I mean, you were in the big game, and you got to figure out how you did. And for me, I'll never forget that.
I think the last thing that anyone should call it is arrogance, right? And if someone does have the feeling to call that arrogance, I think they need to stop and think for a little bit, because whatever it is, it's earned, and it's earned in a very difficult manner. You kind of alluded to this, but has that feeling of confidence and security, maybe, has that extended to other parts of your life that don't involve, survival in the sense that Alone calls it survival?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's helped with my work, for sure. I mean, I, I take my work very seriously. I'm good. I'm okay at what I do. And I realize that everybody makes mistakes, and you can only do the best you can do. And if you do the best you can do, and yet something still goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. We can still handle it. We can still, it gives me a little more perspective in the overall life experience. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I that makes perfect sense, and yeah, it's all so fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. And Larry, I think we're gonna start kind of wrapping up here, and get you back to the rest of your day. A couple of things I want to just touch on. You mentioned that you've got a YouTube channel. Is that something that's still up and running? Are you still active with that, or is it sitting in
It's kind
history?
of, it's a little bit in history. I haven't uploaded any videos for a long time, but if you want to see my progression through the bushcraft or survival type journey that I did, the reason I started my YouTube channel was personally for, or just for personal reasons. What I would do is I would learn about a bushcraft or survival type skill, whether that be through the internet or through a survival book, which I have quite a few. But I would take that skill and I would practice it in my backyard, because what I'm looking for are skills that transfer to many different environments. So if I can see a plant that has a particular property, I don't necessarily need to know that plant's name, but if I can look at that plant and realize that it's good for cordage, I can look at those properties in a different plant in a different region, and utilize that without even knowing what it is. So if you want to see my progression through bushcraft, it's just I think it's back to basics, or I don't even remember. Just Google Larry Roberts Alone, and it should, or not Google, but YouTube in the search, Larry Roberts Alone, and it should pop up. I've got some deer processing videos, fishing videos, bow drill type technique, learning type, mostly skills learning type videos. I still check the comments and still answer the comments, but I don't post too many videos anymore, because I think I've got probably over 100 videos. And then on Instagram, I'm pretty sure I'm back to basics 64 on Instagram and Twitter or something like that too. Back to basics or something like that. But I try to share a little bit. Lately, it's been more travel as opposed to bushcrafting.
Well, you've earned that as well. It's funny whenever I'm sure my wife and other people think I'm nuts when I watch a movie. You use Jason Bourne for an example, right? When I watch some Jason Bourne movies or some movie where the character's gone through a whole awful lot, I always wish that there'd be another edition in the series that was a full length movie of just that person sitting on the beach enjoying some relaxation. So it's good to hear that you were getting your moment to sit on the beach and get some relaxation. So that
Oh, for sure. We've kind of changed gears, man. I'm kind of yeah. It's a little more posh now than it. I don't sleep on logs out in the snow anymore.
well, I'm glad to hear that. That makes me very happy, and you've definitely earned it. So what we'll do is, I'll look for your YouTube and I'll get the full name of your channel, and we'll link, and I'll do a little postscript here to just kind of mention where people can go and see all of that. You mentioned that you teach sometimes, and would that be something where someone do you post classes on your Facebook, or if someone's interested, is that something they can get a hold of you for, or is that just friends and family? How does that work?
Oh, for sure. They can get a hold of me. As a matter of fact, I'm having a class in October. A lady, and the best way to get a hold of me is Facebook. I have a public page plus a private page. And usually I do one class a year, a winter class, because Minnesota is kind of known for our cold. But I just had a lady contact me. And so I'm going to do a private class for her and some of her family. If you're interested, go ahead and message me on Facebook. Like I said, either my public page or my private page. I do have a minimum just because, I mean, I do work for a living and I don't do this full time. And it's for me, it's not a money making type proposition. What it is for me is that's my dream job. I would love to be able to quit my job and teach skills because it's amazing to watch people learn and to see their faces light up with being successful at a particular project. So I mean, I do it more only basically for my enjoyment because I love it. But I mean, there is a minimum because there's certain costs involved. But anyway, just message me, and I'm pretty sure it's reasonable costs if you check into it too. But anyway, just message me. But I'm more active on Facebook than basically any other social media outlet.
Okay, well, I'll get those linked in there as well. So if anyone's interested, then they can go find those in the show notes and look you up there. So I guess in wrapping up, is there anything, Larry, that you feel like I've missed or that we've missed that you would like to speak about or mention, or any words of wisdom or anything you just want to share before we wrap up?
Well, I just hope that I didn't ramble too much, and I hope I answered all your questions. If you have any something I'll try really quick to answer them really quick. But otherwise, if you're happy, no, I'm happy with it. I'm glad you're interested in the show, and I'm glad you're interested in the people's stories outside the show, because I believe this show definitely brings out a unique and diverse type of populace.
That's a very good way to put that. No, I appreciate your openness, and I asked you to come and ramble with me for an hour, so I think you've delivered wonderfully. So, Larry, thank you again for your time. Thank you for sharing your experiences and sharing some very personal things about yourself and about your life. I really appreciate it, and I know that those listening will appreciate that as well. So, again, thank you for your time, and you have a great day.
You bet, man. You too.
All right, take care.
Yep, you too.
Just want to take a minute and again thank Larry for being so gracious and open with his time today, taking away from his busy schedule and from his family and from his travels to sit down with me for an hour today and really to share his experiences and his stories with all of us. I recognize that it can be difficult to open up about difficult things in your life, and especially things that others really can't understand completely. I know there's a lot of different things that go into that, but really just so grateful for Larry taking the time today to open up and to share this part of his life with us. As we mentioned, Larry has different places you can get a hold of him. He has a YouTube channel, which is just Larry Roberts. You can find that quite easily. He did mention that he still keeps up to speed with comments and responds to people there. The best way to get in touch with Larry is going to be through Facebook. You can find him there under Larry Roberts. And finally, he does have an Instagram account as well, which is Larry Roberts or back to the number 2 basics 64. So Larry, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge. And thank you all for listening. Have a great day.